Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the class. Today, we will start a new chapter in history, and that is Devotional Paths to the Divine. And as we are doing the medieval period, the period which started from 8th century, and we find that so many new ideas were started to emerge at that time about religion and we will see that new type of new kinds of bhakti and Sufi movements evolved since the 18th century, and we find first of all there is the idea of a supreme god. So what we find that when before the coming of the large kingdoms, different groups of people were there, and these people worshipped their own gods and goddesses. And as people were brought together through the growth of towns, trades, and empires, we find that the ideas of a particular group of people started to be exchanged with the ideas of the different group. Okay, so the idea that all living things pass through countless cycles of birth and rebirth, mm, and performance of good deeds and bad, all these things came to be accepted by the society. And at this time, this was also accepted, that this idea was also accepted that all human beings are not equal at the time of birth. So this was, we see that this type of feeling was responsible for the division of the society into two types of people, like the noble family or a high caste, uh, and the common people. The noble family or high caste, they were having social privileges, and the basis of this privilege was birth only, and there were common people who were not having any kind of rights, and it was all was decided by the birth. So we see that there were many people who were not ready to accept this idea that people are unequal at the time of birth, and since we find that new ideas like the idea of Buddhism and Jainism started to be emerged. People were not ready to accept this idea of inequality, and they wanted to overcome social differences, and they wanted to break the cycle of rebirth through personal effort. So in this effort, Buddhism and Jainism emerged, and people started to follow them. And one more idea emerged at this time, that is the idea of a supreme god. There is a supreme god, and this god can deliver humans uh, from the bondage of birth and rebirth if we show our devotion, so our love towards God. It This idea was given in Bhagavad Gita also, and we find this that during this period only Shiva, Vishnu, and Durga, they started to be worshipped as supreme deities, and elaborate rituals were started to be done. So in order to show your dedication, so your worship, you should do elaborate rituals. And at the same time, we find that god and goddesses worshipped in different areas came to be identified with Shiva, Vishnu, or Durga. Main These three gods were there, and in different parts of the country, different parts of the country, we find that different these gods were only worshipped, but by different names, है ना. शिव, विष्णु एंड दुर्गा ही मेन गॉड थे, लेकिन डिफरेंट पार्ट्स ऑफ द कंट्री में उनको डिफरेंट नाम से जाना जाता था, है ना. और साथ ही वी फाइंड दैट लोकल मिथ्स एंड लेजेंड्स दे बिकेम अ पार्ट ऑफ द पुरानिक स्टोरी. जो पुराण में हमारे दिए हुए ओल्ड स्टोरीज जो हैं, उसमें लोकल मिथ्स और लेजेंड उसके पार्ट बन गए. और जो भी पुरानाज में मेथड ऑफ वर्शिप दिया गया कि कैसे आपको पूजा करनी है, वो भी लोकल जो ग्रुप ऑफ फैमिलीज होते थे उसमें इसको इंट्रोड्यूस किया गया कि हाउ टू व्हाट शुड बी द मेथड ऑफ वर्शिप. Okay, and we find that Puranas also says that it was possible for devotees to receive the grace of God regardless of their caste status. It means that the Puranas also believe in the principle of equality. The God is graceful, and the grace of God can be received by anyone. A person may belong to lower caste, a person may belong to upper caste, but the person will be able to receive the grace of the God, because the God does not make any difference between the upper caste and the lower caste. So we see that mm, this idea is called idea of bhakti. It means that God is there equally for all. We all can receive the grace of the God, even though we may belong to lower caste, but the grace of God can be achieved, can be received. And it was also it is also associated with that we must have devotion for God, we must have love for God, and that is the only way through which we can be emancipated, we can get salvation. Now we see that in South India, a new kind of bhakti emerged. That is, we see that Nayanars were there, who were the saints devoted to शिवा. नायनार जो थे वो शिवा की पूजा करते थे. ये आपके लिए इम्पोर्टेंट है. ये साउथ इंडिया के दो इम्पोर्टेंट ग्रुप्स हैं, नायनार्स एंड alvars. So Nayanars, they were devoted to Shiva, and alvars, they were devoted to Vishnu. Okay, and in this we find that in this Nayanars and alvars, all caste were included. All caste means those who were considered untouchables were also included in this religious movement. Untouchables like Pulayar and Panars, they all were included in the Nayanars and the Alvars. But yet we see that they were critical of Buddhism and Jainism, and they preached love for Shiva or Vishnu as the path to salvation. If we want to get rid of this cycle of birth and rebirth, uh, we must have love for Shiva or Vishnu in our heart, so that we can achieve emancipation, we can achieve salvation. And we find that this Sangam literature, which is the earliest example of Tamil literature, and in this Sangam literature, we find that the ideal of love and heroism is there. And so, what they did, these Nayanars and Alberts, they they mixed this ideal of love and heroism, which was present in the Sangam literature, with the values of bhakti. And we see that these nayanas and alvars, they used to move from one place to another. They composed very unique poems, and these poems were the praise of the deities who were enshrined in the villages they visited, and they also sing these poems. इस तरह से दिस इज व्हाट वी कॉल्ड भजन, जिसे हम कहते हैं, उस तरह की चीज़ें जो है वो होती थी. नाउ वी सी दैट देयर वेर 63 नायनार्स who belonged to different caste backgrounds like potters, untouchable workers, peasants, hunters, soldiers, brahmins, chiefs, all were there in the Nayanars. So it was based on the concept of equality, and the best known Nayanars were Appar, Sambandar, Sundarar, Manikawa, Sagar. These are the important Nayanars. And we find that there are two sets of compilation of their songs. उन्होंने अपने songs को compile किया था, उसके दो सेट थे. One is Devaram and the second is Tiruvakakam. These are important two sets of compilation of songs, Devaram and Tiruvakakam. Okay, and now we see there were 12 alvars. 63 Nayanars were there and 12 alvars were there. These alvars were, they also came from divergent background. Divergent मतलब अलग अलग background के वो थे. Like ऐसा नहीं कि all were belonging to brahmanas or all were belonging to lower caste. हर तरह के जो थे लोग इसमें मौजूद थे. एंड जो बहुत ही बेस्ट नोन अलवर हैं उनका नाम है पेरिया अलवर. एंड उनकी डॉटर, पेरिया अलवर की डॉटर थी अंदल. टोंडारा दी पोड्डी अलवर and Namalvar. These are the names of the daughter of Periyalvar. And the songs of Alvars are compiled in Divya Prabandham. Okay, the name of the book is Divya Prabandham. Now we see that between 10th and 12th centuries, the Chola and Pandya king, they started building elaborate temples at those places uh, where saints and poets visited, when where these saints and poets used to sit and sing bhajans and poems in the praise of God. And so we find that a link was created between the bhakti tradition and temple worship. During this period only, this link was generated because temples were being built by the kings. And we find that the poems of the saints were compiled, and here we find one more new term is hagiographies were written. Hagiography means राइटिंग ऑफ सेंट्स लाइफ. जो सेंट होते थे उनकी लाइफ के बारे में जो लिखा जाता है उसको हम हेजियोग्राफीज कहते हैं. दैट इज द रिलीजियस बायोग्राफी ऑफ द सेंट्स. और ये सेंट कौन थे? दीज वर अल्वर्स एंड नायनर्स. तो जो गॉड के वर्शिप में, डेडिकेशन में सॉन्ग्स गाए गए उनको कंपोज किया गया, कंपाइल किया गया. और जो रिलीजियस सेंट्स थे हल्वर और नायनर्स के, उनकी बायोग्राफीज को भी लिखी गई, है ना. सो दीज टेक्स्ट आर वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट बिकॉज दे प्रोवाइड अ सोर्स फॉर राइटिंग हिस्ट्री ऑफ द भक्ति ट्रेडिशन. भक्ति ट्रेडिशन के बारे में हमें जो भी पता चलता है उसके लिए दीज आर द रिटन sources. So we find that there were some important philosophers of South who are associated with this bhakti movement. And one of the most influential philosophers of India was Sankaracharya. He was born in Kerala in the 8th century, and he gave this concept of Advait. Advait means uh, doctrine of oneness, doctrine of the oneness of individual soul and the supreme God. And the God is the ultimate reality. So, this is the concept of oneness. It means that all the human beings are part of the universal soul, and this individual soul meets the universal soul, and that is that it becomes one when it meets when the universal individual soul meets the universal soul, it becomes one. So that is the doctrine of oneness of the individual soul and the universal soul. And according to him, Brahma is the only reality. Brahma was formless, it has no attributes, and in his opinion, the world around us is an illusion, or we can say it Maya. ये सिर्फ एक माया है, it's not real. Real कौन है? God, Brahma. Brahma is the ultimate reality, and the whole world is a Maya. And he preached for renunciation of the world. If we wanted to get salvation, then we have to adopt the path of knowledge, and we have to renunciate the world. जो अपने फैमिली घर को आपको छोड़ना पड़ेगा, है ना, और नॉलेज के पाथ को अडॉप्ट करना होगा, और तभी हमें हम ब्रह्मा के को समझ पाएंगे. वी विल बी एबल टू नो ब्रह्मा, and then we will be able to attain salvation. And Ramanuj was another philosopher of that time who was born in Tamil Nadu in the 18th century. And Ramanuj, he was deeply influenced by the Alvars, and according to him, the what is the best means of attaining salvation was by doing intense devotion towards Vishnu. And this was the best, according to him, the best means of salvation was through intense devotion to Vishnu. And Vishnu helps the devotees to attain the bliss of union with him. है ना? With the help of by your devotion, by your love, you can become one with Vishnu. And this Ramanuj, he propounded the doctrine of Visishtadvait. जैसे हमने देखा, शंकराचार्य ने अद्वैतवाद का सिद्धांत दिया था, और रामानुज जो है, he is giving the doctrine of विशिष्ट अद्वैत or qualified oneness, है ना. And in this qualified oneness, what happens that the soul, even when united with the supreme food, remains distinct. This is uh, special about it. That is why it is called विशिष्ट अद्वैतवाद. अद्वैत है, यानी कि अद्वैत का मतलब oneness. You become one with the Brahma. Individual soul meets universal soul. But it is Visist Advait. It means that in spite of becoming one with the Supreme God, you remain distinct. है ना? So we find that Ramanu's doctrine greatly inspired the new strand of bhakti, which developed in North India after that. नॉर्थ इंडिया की भी भक्ति को रामानुज ने बहुत ज़्यादा इम्पैक्ट किया. ओके, सो दिस इज ऑल फॉर टुडे. As we will discuss about some other philosophers and saints which are very much important during the medieval period. Like we will discuss about saints of Maharashtra, and we will also see about the Nathpanthi, Siddhas and Yogis, and Islam and Sufism. So, okay, this is all for today. Now we will meet in the next class.